are she and her. And this evening, we'll be discussing The Social Dilemma, the 2020 documentary by Jeff Orlowski. And with me this evening is our guest speaker, Professor Rebecca, oh God, Professor Rebecca Wexler.
I go by all sorts of kinds of names. Also,
okay, I'm glad I got that out. We're so glad to have you, Rebecca. Rebecca is an assistant professor of law at the University of California at Berkeley School of Law. Rebecca teaches, researches, and writes on issues concerning data, technology, and criminal justice, and her work has especially focused on technology as it affects privacy and the impact of algorithms on criminal justice sentencing. So again, welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed watching the film, which I wouldn't have had a chance to do without this, and I'm so excited to talk about it.
Oh yeah, there's a lot to talk about. Well, just to refresh everyone about the importance of this film, we want to show you a short clip provided by the director, which he labels the democracy dilemma, which will be one of our focuses this evening. So, running the clip. I'm not sure what's happening. Here we go.
I think we're in a very, very dangerous moment.
Election integrity.
Legal voter suppression.
Radical indifference.
More tribalism.
Foreign election interference.
You don't have a natural cognitive defense against this stuff. There are incredibly motivated groups of people with a particular agenda, and the social ecosystem has given them the tools to reach other people to spread that agenda. That can be anything from a terrorist organization reaching out to recruit, like we saw with ISIS, or the Internet Research Agency reaching out to exploit societal divisions, like we saw in the 2016 election.
As we saw in the 2016 election, governments are also increasingly figuring out we can actually use these social media platforms to manipulate public opinion to our own end, to spread disinformation, to spread propaganda, and to really gin up hatred sometimes against vulnerable populations or the political opposition or whatever it is.
If you think about presidential campaigns from years past, they used TV. And they used, radio and other media that was the same for every person who heard or saw those advertisements. But if you're thinking about how advertising works on Facebook or Twitter or other social media, they can actually customize that ad to very small groups of people who all have, say, the same personality type. And that enabled campaigns to manipulate very small segments of the population to do very specific things, whether it was to vote for a particular candidate or to raise money or potentially even to not vote at all.
These campaigns are so well executed, so well done. You don't have a natural cognitive defense against this stuff. You just are going to take what you see credulously, particularly if it appeals to your biases, which it should if they're doing their job targeting the right people with the right content. You're going to be receptive to it.
This is not a future society that is compatible with democracy, that is compatible with human freedom, that is compatible with the most elemental sense of human agency.
Democracy isn't simply the option to vote for candidate A or candidate B. It is being well informed about what the candidates actually stand for. That's what we're at risk of losing.
Having outside parties interfere in our election is just a horrible thing. Voting is the most basic building block of democracy. And if we don't have that, what do we have?
All right. Sorry that we had a little bit of freezing on our transmission, but I think it was pretty clear what they were going after. If you're just joining us, I'm Anita Stapin, a member of the Appreciating Diversity film series. And we've been around for about 20 years. We show free docs, followed by discussion with a guest speaker. And our website is diversityfilmseries.org. We will be posting resources from tonight's webinar, as well as a link to the recorded webinar later. So check our website. And we hope that you'll participate by asking us questions. Somewhere on your screen, you will see an icon for Q&A. When you do locate that, you can press on it and type your question into the box. We'll be looking at those later. And I think we're ready to move toward actual questions. Rebecca, a lot of problems caused by social media result from the use of algorithms to manipulate us. Can you briefly describe what an algorithm is and why they're so dangerous?
Yes, well, first I want to just say thank you again so much for having me and how much I enjoyed this film and learned a lot from watching the film and the clip that you just showed that sets the stage on democracy. I'm not trying to evade your question. I promise I thought about it in advance and I have an answer. But I just want to say one thing about the little clip, which is I know a number of the people I've met a number of the people in the film, and Kathy O'Neill, who's the wonderful person with the bright blue hair, actually also plays in a bluegrass band, and I saw her play in the bluegrass band. So I just wanted, it reminded me of that when I saw her come up. It's not just blue hair, it's bluegrass music. So what is an algorithm? The word is often used in lots of different ways. So computer scientists have a strict definition and then policy people use it more loosely. But basically it means a set of instructions to do something. And so we can analogize it to the instructions for a loaf of bread. If you're going to make a loaf of bread or cake, but we'll pick bread, you would have to have very clear instructions about what ingredients, how much, when to put them in, what order, how much they weigh, how much you should fluff the flour, and then, you know, how hot the oven is and how long you let it rise and you put it in the sunshine and whatever. And it's all very clear. So in the old times, when computer programs were manually written, these algorithms were all written by people in something called source code, just a set of instructions to the computer to do the thing you want, bake your bread. The film talks a little bit about how some of the algorithms running our social media platforms that feed us information are opaque, and even their creators don't fully understand how they're built. And so that kind of more advanced algorithm, I was thinking about this the other day because in the pandemic, I got a bread maker. And we can analogize those new kinds of algorithms to a bread maker, where you still have some manual input. You're putting in the ingredients. That's what we would call training data. So data you have about the environment. And then you have some manual program that you're selecting, different kinds of training programs that you can use to develop a predictive model using those ingredients data. And so that would be like the buttons on my bread machine. I don't have to know a lot of instructions. I just pick what cycle I want, and then out comes a loaf of bread. So that's a kind of new way that people are making algorithms, or you could call them machine learning models. And those are the types of tools that people are very worried about because we don't really know how they work. We don't really know if you're just operating the bread machine, you know, what temperature it's at, how long it waits, what exactly it does to the bread. And it turns out that we're relying on so much computer power now that nobody really knows how these things are getting baked. They don't have 100 parameters, they have billions of parameters. So we can't understand them.
Well, so, but we do know some of the outputs from the algorithms. And maybe you could say a word about what kinds of outputs, both positive and negative, we see from the algorithms, say in our social platforms like Facebook or, Twitter. I'm not sure. I mean, Twitter is a little bit more of a blank book to me, but certainly in Facebook, we know that we are seeing a different feed for pretty much every single individual person.
That's right. It's really surprising when you stop and think about it. And I think it's something that a lot of people don't realize, that when they use social media platforms, they're seeing something that's delivered, customized to them. Excuse me. It's, in fact, it's not just social media. It's Google. It's your Google searches.
Right.
It's all kinds of interactions we have on the internet, because as the film's telling us, the companies are monitoring everything you do on the internet, and then they're customizing the results of what you see, what is prioritized to you, what's advertised to you, but also what's suggested or recommended to you, what's at the top of your news list, based on what you've watched, what you've looked at, what you've clicked on in the past.
Right. It's a personal profile for each person who uses the platform. It's hard to imagine that the millions and millions and millions of us who use these platforms each have our own individual set of data points created through the algorithm. And I mean, I think the next question really is, why is this so dangerous? What has happened as a result of this type of very, very particularized and personalized use of algorithm data?
Well, the really serious concern that everybody's struggling, I mean, if we should all be struggling with and worried about, is the concern that you've teed us up with that clip. What does this mean for our democracy?
Mhm.
We are in a polarized time, and when we're consuming more and more targeted materials that are crafted to appeal to us, then we are not sharing our observations and information with those around us, and certainly not sharing a common set of facts in our
Right.
country.
Right.
So people have become more aware of this now with campaigns to raise awareness of disinformation and the spread of misinformation.
Mhm.
But it's been a problem for a long time. And people have, it made me think, zooming out, one thing you could do if you want to try to see a little bit about the kinds of ways that information is being fed to you in a targeted manner is, that this is not for social media platforms, but on the internet, if you open an internet browser window and you're searching around for stuff in your normal account, you'll see hits on your search. But if you open what's called a private browsing window, that window doesn't, well, the companies still track everything you do through that window, but in any event, it's a less it's less curated to what you've done in the past. And so you can actually, on your own computer at the same moment, search for something in your signed in account browser and search for something in the private browser and see different results. And that's just off the internet from the search algorithms. That's not even based on social media platforms that have these business models to try to keep you hooked and attached in their universe.
That's a very interesting point. One of the speakers in the film, Jaron Lanier, makes the point that one of the only websites you can go to and see the exact same information no matter who you are is Wikipedia. And I was very struck by that. I don't know how websites are, evolving their specific, whatever it is I'm going to see, but I do trust Wikipedia. And it's a good thing to know. But
I loved that example in the film too. I loved it, especially how he talked about, like, wouldn't it feel really weird if you went to an offline dictionary, and everybody who looked up something found a different definition.
Yes. Let me remind our viewers to send us your questions. And it doesn't have to be a question. It could be a comment or something that you disagree with or something that you would just like us to get into the conversation. So look for the Q&A icon and add whatever it is that's on your mind. We would really appreciate that. One of the ways that these algorithms have been used in terms of disinformation and misinformation is that we know that they can target specific segments of the population and focus especially on a prediction of what they think their biases will make them interested in. And we know that misinformation and disinformation travels 6 times faster than truth, why? Well, often because that disinformation is emotionally charged, or what we call clickbait. It's like, oh, I want to find out about that. And then when you click that, you get the next level of intensity in terms of what you're shown. They've shown that most of the people who joined extremist groups in the past few years were led there essentially based on Facebook suggestions for groups they might be interested in, or platforms or websites they might be interested in. So what is being discussed about how to deal with this misinformation and disinformation, which is, as we know, polarizing our country?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, right. I mean, so just exactly as you're saying, there is this problem where, I mean, I have this as sometimes that, it's like late at night, you find a YouTube video. I think there was a story about this in the film about the kind of rabbit holes you can go down, but you just spend so much time there was a series of YouTube videos of like furry animals eating watermelons, and it's just like, I had no plans to spend my time watching this video. And then you just watch one and then another and then another. And like, and so that, that happens and that's designed that way. And I thought this film did a really great job of showing how that serves the business interests of these platforms. And so
let's stop for a minute there, yeah. Rebecca. Why does it serve their interest to have you watching videos of, what was it, eating watermelon?
Just various furry animals.
Animals. Okay.
Small animals, larger. The elephant eating a watermelon. It's kind of like a grape. It's just amazing that it is fascinating. But yeah.
So, but why do they show us this to us, or why did they show this to you? What do they get out of it?
Right. And so I don't want to spoil the film for people who haven't seen it. I don't want to go over it more for people that have. But the thing that we all do need to realize is, we're not paying for these services. And so what we're doing is actually producing data for the services that the services then mine and create data-driven marketing products that they sell to paying customers. Yeah. And so there are these divided loyalties that the platforms have, where they want to collect as much data about us as possible, because that's what they package and sell in various forms. So they want to keep us there. They want us to stay in their platform. They don't want us to get our information somewhere else. They'd rather us get a copy of that information within their four corners.
Yeah, because the longer that they stay on, that they keep us on, the more ads they can sell to us. And something I learned I didn't understand before this was, I would look at ads and say, oh, not interested. But what I didn't understand was that I don't have to be interested. The ad has already been sold to the platform for whatever amount of money it went for. And whether I'm interested or not, they've made their money. And the more I stay on, the more money they make. So going back into some of the areas that you and I talked about previously, what are some of the remedies that the law community and lawmakers are looking at to try and rein in some of these practices?
So that is the $1 million question. And So there's a few different things I was thinking about about this. Lawyers like to think in analogies.
Mm.
That's kind of how one of the ways we operate. So you have a new technology, say it's a social media platform, and you think, well, what is this kind of similar to? How should law relate to this? How should the government approach this? And so there are these different analogies that people have been proposing for social media platforms that would bring in different areas of law as a way to regulate them. So one of the leading analogies is to call the platforms what's called a fiduciary. It's basically like thinking about the social media platform as somebody like your doctor, your lawyer, your accountant. And the deal here is that you have a relationship with these professionals
Mhm.
where you have to, in order to receive their service, you have to give them lots of very sensitive information about yourself.
Yeah.
And you don't get any sensitive information back from them. It's not a two-way street.
Right.
So you're in the doctor's office telling the doctor all of the sensitive things about you, but you don't know anything about them. They have all the control. And as a result, we've had these relationships for a long time. Attorneys are another one, this kind of relationship. And so the law says, well, if you're going to be that kind of professional, you should have to have some duties of care for how you treat your clients. You can't just take, I'm a lawyer, I can't take my client's information. I've worked as a public defender. I can't take somebody accused of a crime, their information they give me in confidence, and start selling it to an advertiser. I mean, that would just be outrageous. So we don't let certain professions do that. Instead, we say, we're going to call you a fiduciary. And that means that you have some responsibilities for using the information you collect from your clients in their best interest. And if you violate that, they can sue you. So that's one model, is like, well, let's think of them like doctors or lawyers or accountants. Another model is to say, no, they're not like doctors, lawyers, accountants, but they are like traditional monopolies. And so what we should be doing is approaching them with antitrust law. And one way that I was thinking about, how to talk about this is if you imagine that all of our roads were privately owned, there would be a reason that the roads that connect more people become a more valuable network. It's not that valuable to have a road that doesn't go anywhere, that doesn't connect anyone. But if we had one person owning all of the roads, we'd be in trouble. There'd be too much power there. And so in order to stop this concentration of power, and lots of bad things can flow from this concentration of power, we impose antitrust rules that might do things like require interoperability. Interoperability, silly jargony term, of course, but like, your light socket. So all the light sockets, the electrical sockets, they take the same plugs, and that means they're interoperable. So lots of people can make electronics and you plug it into the outlet. So too, maybe we should treat these social media platforms as monopolies and say, we're going to impose some requirement of interoperability. And what that would do is it would give consumers more, or users more choices. So you might be able to say, I want to work on a social media platform. I want a social media experience that doesn't harvest my data. I want to pay for it, or I want it to have certain privacy commitments, or I want it to have certain encryption. But right now, it's not very valuable if you start up one of those alternatives, because they're not connected to the network. So you won't be able to connect to your grandkids, to your grandparents, to your parents, whatever, your colleagues. And so if we have an interoperability requirement, then you could pick a kind of privacy protective platform for you to use and still connect to everybody that's in the Facebook world. And maybe that's the way to try to fix this. So different analogies, some different kinds of proposals.
Right.
The other big debate is Section 230, which we could get into later. But
Okay. Um, Yeah, the interoperability question is a new concept to me. So I'm very glad that you brought it up, because on the one hand, I wasn't sure what using an anti-monopoly approach would do, because I mean, there's very little, the companies are so big now and have so much power and so much influence politically that it's very hard to imagine how a platform like Facebook would allow that kind of opening up of their proprietary information and the way that they operate. Um, uh, well, as a lawyer, would you say that one or another of these remedies seems to be getting more traction as a way to deal with this?
Well, that's an interesting question. That's an interesting question, because there's two avenues for change as a lawyer. There's the courts and there's the policymakers. And there's other avenues. We need media, we need social activists, we need community organizing. All of those things have an effect on the courts and the lawmakers. But I'm more trained on the courts and the lawmakers. So in the lawmaker side, both of these kinds of ideas are in proposed legislation that's being talked about and batted around. The fiduciary obligations proposal was built into some of the federal privacy bills that have been presented. There's a debate to try to get a federal privacy law. We don't have a federal privacy law. We have a lot of state privacy laws. And so the fiduciary one gained some traction in some of those bills. It's come under some critique by the antitrust folks who think, and Anita, you might have, I think in some of our earlier conversations, you made one of these very excellent counter arguments, which is to say, we just can't trust this business model at all. But perhaps, I don't want to put words in your mouth. But if we are suspicious of this business model, through and through, maybe the fiduciary model will never work, because maybe the corporate responsibility to the shareholders, where they have some duties there and it could be sued there, are going to overshadow any duty that we impose on them for their users. And so really we got to just break this up and use the antitrust approach. There's a woman named Lena Khan who I went to law school with, and she is just amazing. She has kind of revolutionized antitrust law for a new generation of progressives. So we think of it as this old dusty kind of thing with like monopoly boards and railroads and stuff. And it had really become irrelevant for the past number of decades because of a particular view of what counted as an monopoly problem. It had been kind of thinned out so that the only thing that counted as actionable, or where you get a remedy of some kind, is if there was price fixing or the high costs of products for consumers. And if you're getting low cost stuff, then there's no antitrust problem.
Or
and
free stuff.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Or free stuff.
All
the platforms are free, so you're getting it all for free.
You're getting it free. What's the antitrust problem? How could you complain about this? It's so consumer friendly. It's free. And Lena Khan has been the leader of a movement. She was on the cover of the New York Times Magazine. She's been, just working and just scooped up by the government right after, after law school. She's just a tremendous national leader of a movement called the hipster antitrust movement, where people are saying, no, we should really worry about problems with democracy, threats to our democracy, threats to consumer just choice options, employee welfare. All of these things are also harms that monopolies impose on our society, and we can use antitrust law to address those too.
That sounds really interesting, and we will be sure to include some of that information on what we post on our website. We'll get that from you and add that.
Lena Khan is so cool. Total fan.
Do you have the idea that any of these remedies that you've talked about, either singly or in some kind of combination, could actually work to mitigate these harms that the platforms are currently affecting?
Definitely.
Mhm.
I totally do. I don't have, I think that we're in control of our country and we can change the law to do what we want. I believe that. I think it's hard and there's
Mhm.
lots of forces against, us who don't want to
Mhm.
do that. I think the deck is stacked against people that are trying to rein in corporate power and that the law and the government tend to, unfortunately, there's so many advantages to people with money. And then, but I believe that there are avenues for change that we can use to shape the law to serve the public good. I totally believe that. So we can have legislation, we can have regulation, we can have our courts. One thing I tell my students is there's a narrative that our government isn't tech savvy enough to regulate big tech. And that narrative says our lawmakers in Congress don't know what they're doing. Our courts are too slow. Who does that narrative serve? That narrative, in my view, is a way of delegitimizing our democratic control as the people. I
Yeah.
believe in our courts.
I
And
see
think
that.
they're
Yeah.
many
And from what I saw when the tech giants were in front of Congress or in front of the Senate, I'm sorry to say, I don't remember which it was. It was very clear that the questioners completely understood what the business model was, where the harmful effects were coming out. So I'm not sure I agree with that narrative. I think if they weren't hip before, they are getting hip to what this is all about and starting to see I think probably from their constituents, what is going on and people being very upset by all this.
I'm so glad to hear you say that because I absolutely agree. I was talking to somebody yesterday, a former intern from when I was working at Legal Aid, who was saying, oh, well, in that congressional hearing, isn't it amazing that those questions, they didn't know what they're talking about. And I said, that's not true. That our legislators, they have staffers, they have experts that they consult with. Those congressional hearings are performances. And the questions they were asking were very carefully designed.
Mhm.
And yet this media narrative that there's been, so much influence from PR companies inside of these tech interests as well, spun a narrative that those hearings somehow undermined the expertise of our lawmakers. I completely agree with you, Anita. I think that the hearings showed they did know what they were talking about, and they do.
I see that we're at about 5:34 p.m. I'm going to just raise a couple of other framings for how to address the problems we're discussing, which you did briefly mention. The first one is the idea that is proposed and strongly advocated by Tristan Harris, the protagonist, if you would call it that, of the film, which is that of a subscription model, where we pay, instead of getting what we think is free, we pay for what we want on the internet, and therefore the advantage that they have now of using our privacy data essentially becomes useless because we're paying anyway. Whatever we want to look at, we can look at, and there won't, well, at least in my idealistic view of this, there won't be an advantage to using our data that way to sell us things because they're getting paid anyway. And the second framework that has also been proposed is to look at the internet as a utility. And Tristan Harris calls it an attention utility. I think it's really a utility that connects the world at this point. And it would be, we would pay for it in a similar way to paying for power or water. And we would be able to subsidize that utility for people who could not pay the full amount. Do you have any thoughts about either of these options?
Yeah. Well, I think they're both really great, interesting proposals. I have some concerns about them. So I should just say I can air some possible counter arguments. I don't know exactly where I personally stand, but as a law professor, one of the things that I think my role is to say, well, here's some alternate perspectives. And so one possible perspective, subscription model, that's great. One possible perspective, though, is, well, why don't they get the money from both of us? They'll get our money and they'll sell to the advertisers. Or another issue is this, something we talked about, Anita, before. Some of the problems that targeted data mining create for democracy actually can't be affixed by individual opt-out choices. So even if there is a subscription model and lots of individuals who care about this stuff go there, if other individuals are using the data mining model, the algorithms that the companies have can actually make predictions about you based on your characteristics, even if you didn't participate in the data mining version. So, maybe we have to force everybody into a subscription model and then force the companies to only have that revenue stream. And that would get us to the world where that fixes it. That might have other concerns.
That's an interesting argument, because they already have a lot of data on each of us.
They have data on each of us. They have data, they have data on you and me. If I never log in, they will be able to predict based on my neighbors, based on my demographics, how I'm going to vote, what I'm going to buy. They'll know that even if I don't ever have an account.
I think that's something that many of us don't realize either, that there are other ways to scrape the data other than tracking you online. And what about the utility model?
So the utility model is interesting. I will just come out and confess, I know a little bit less about that. So I don't want to say something that's ill-informed, but my immediate thoughts about it are look, where I've heard it come up has to do with net neutrality. If you are going to say that this is like, water service or electricity service, then what are the options for paying to get better water? What are the options for paying to get faster service? And is that okay? The other area it comes up with the kind of like common carrier concept. When I was talking about analogies, what do we analogize to? Well, this is an analogy to water pipes. Another analogy that's kind of similar is to, FedEx. So do we say, this is carrying our messages, the way the pipes carry water, the way FedEx carries packages, social media carries our data packets from me to you or you to me. And therefore we should treat the platforms the same way we treat water pipes or FedEx, where we really don't impose we don't impose liability on FedEx for the contents of the packages they transmit. And so
that's going into section 230.
That's going into section 230.
I'm looking at our time. I think to be thorough about this, that we should just mention the question of reforming Section 230. And let me just say, Section 230 is a section of the Federal Communications Commission rules, which have held that these platforms are not responsible and not liable for what gets posted.
Right, exactly right.
So if you want to take it from there, I'm not sure what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, so this is just another option for reform. Another option for reform would be to try to change that law. And it's exactly as Anita said, it's a law that says that anybody that's carrying content, that's a platform that just allows users to post stuff, isn't liable for what the users post.
Yeah.
And that goes on multiple layers of the internet. So the more infrastructural layers, and then software platforms built on top of those, like Facebook, or you could have a Facebook additional app, that somebody made that's like inside of Facebook, and that would also be a platform. So there are layers that could be called platforms. Anything that has content that it hosts and presents to the world that's created by somebody other than the platform itself. Yeah. And so people are trying to talk about, reforming that.
Well, I think this would be a good time to bring in my colleague, Christy Van Slyke, and here's Christy, as she says, little tiny Christy, because for whatever reason, our program is not allowing her to be as big as you and I are, Rebecca. But hi, Christy.
Hello.
Hi.
And hi, Rebecca.
So I have not been looking at the questions, but I'm wondering what you've gathered.
Yes, thanks, Anita. And thank you, Rebecca. This has been such a fascinating and informative discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much. Our audience has been participating. I want to thank them also. We have quite a number of questions to send your way, and we'll just try to reach as many of these as we can in the allotted time. Rebecca, somebody asked if you're aware of efforts to establish a kind of truth in privacy, a statement that would standardize terms so users wouldn't need to read and understand pages of privacy policies that are used by the platforms.
Oh, that's a great proposal. It sounds like the questioner may actually know a particular proposal to do that, but I think that would be great. I did have a professor when I was in law school years ago, Ian Ayres, who had a similar proposal where he wanted to make these end user license agreements or privacy policies more credible, more transparent, more substantively understandable to the users. But what he wanted to do was have a special requirement that any terms that a normal person would not expect have to be emphasized in a separate box, like, highlighted. So his name is Ian Ayres. He's written a little bit about this. But that issue that the question raises, what are we really consenting to when we sign up for these things? You'd have to spend, 10 years of your life to read every privacy policy. Nobody reads them. That's a really important issue. There is also an argument that even if we fixed these contracts so that they were comprehensible, it wouldn't be good enough, because privacy is a public good, a common good. Information we give affects somebody else. And if we leave it to end users to make the choices, even if they are informed, it puts the responsibility on individuals for something that's a collective issue. So there's different ways to think about it, but certainly having more transparent, better informed consent procedures would be an improvement over what we've got right now.
Certainly. And the questioner's idea of um, a standardized statement across platforms would certainly enhance the understanding, because everybody would come to see the same statement and understand that it meant the same thing.
You're right. And then I think it's a great idea. I hadn't heard it before, so maybe it's the
Yeah.
question. I think you should run with it and
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
And I'm just realizing if you did that too, then you would have the benefit of like Consumer Reports could analyze it and there.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And
Yeah.
along those same lines, a couple of people have asked about the message that you get when you go to some websites asking if you to agree to having cookies installed, and wondering how these social media platforms are utilizing these cookies, and what you might recommend in terms of how a user respond to these questions.
Yeah, I mean, so my understanding is that the cookies are tracing you and tracing what you do when you go to other websites. You agree to cookies, and then they can trace and remember who you are when you come back to their website. And then I think some of them can also trace what you're doing elsewhere on the internet. So what do I recommend you do about it?
Yeah.
You know, I don't know.
I was going to add one thing, which is that it's not just cookies. You're also agreeing that your data can be sold in many cases to merchants who will then sell advertising on that website focused toward you. And in many cases now I've found that you can opt out of that. The cookies themselves are another story, but if there is an option to not sell your personal information, I would recommend going with that.
Right, opt out. So that leads directly to another question, and the statement has been made that one should unplug and run, as they say, unplug. So the question is, would it help if many of us left or never enrolled in Facebook to begin with? Would that in fact begin to change the power of social media, or is that one of the remedies, just having people leave these sites?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to be able to. From the film, one of the most powerful parts for me was that part where they have the family at the dinner and they can't get away from their device. And so I like the unplug and run idea, even just individually, to sort of take back. Somebody had said in the film, the richness of our human experience. Yes. And I certainly feel happier when I spend some time off of my devices. I don't know whether it would change. Sure, I think it would change. It would certainly. I guess the question is, you have to run an unplug from more than just Facebook.
Right. Good point. Yes.
Yeah. But I like the idea, and I think it would have an effect. Sure. So you just opt out by never signing up.
Yeah. Yeah. I never.
I'll also. I kind of just lost my train of thought.
Well, let me ask real quick. Rebecca mentioned that in the film they showed the family at dinner, and we've had a couple of audience members ask about, first of all, the new possibility of preschool social media sites that have been bantered about. Yes, there are a few of our biggest sites now are actually developing like a Facebook type thing, and Instagram, I think, also for preschoolers. And then two other questioners have talked about that power that's mentioned in the film, and as you referred at the dinner table, to the addictive quality to children and adolescents, maybe in particular, to the social media platforms. And if you believe that because of these new preschool ideas, for example, that the government or our legislators might take more seriously the need to act to pass some legislation to actually regulate these sites for children, or as they apply to children, just as we do other, regulations that protect children.
Mm, mm. Well, I hope so. I think there are some special privacy regulations that do apply to data from minors already. So I think there's some of that does distinguish and apply. But I'm surprised to hear about the targeting of preschools.
Yeah, it's happening, right?
Yeah.
Did you remember, Anita? Did you want to mention?
Yeah. Thank you, Chrissy. Yeah, I was going to say that we have not, in this particular discussion, we have not focused very strongly on the very, very, very negative effects on young people in terms of increased depression, increased suicide, and a general degradation of self-esteem and self-worth, because they are so much on social media websites and starting to, develop their own self-worth from them. So any negative coming back, as we saw in the film, has a very strong impact. But what I was going to say is that on the social media the Social Dilemma website, which is thesocialdilemma.com, you will find a lot of information about how to help your family, your teens, your younger kids, whatever the word is, detox, set limits on, understand the difficulties, in staying online for long periods of time, which can be very helpful. There's a lot of information there that for families and for anyone to look into.
Good to know. Good resources there. Rebecca, can you explain how do we get to the private search engine versus the more public ones?
So, yeah.
Do you
That's
mean
kind of simple.
privately owned?
No, I think she.
Oh, the private browsers.
Yeah.
Yes. So you can, I mean, I could even just try to pull it up on my, yeah. So on Chrome, if you're on Chrome, then you go to File at the drop down, and it looks like in Chrome it's called New Incognito Window. And so just at the top left of your screen, you'll have that drop down under File, and you'll pick New Incognito Window. Let's see, under Safari, I think it's called something else. Under Safari, you open Safari in the same File drop down on the upper left of your screen, and you go New Private Window.
Mm-hmm.
And so it'd be something like that too in Firefox. And let's see, what's the Firefox one is? New Private Window in Firefox.
Oh, great.
Mm-hmm.
Very helpful. Thank you.
I know. Well, it was my computer's right here, so they will just check.
And I will add one more thing, which is that there are now search engines out there, search platforms that do not mine your personal data. And, I think one of them is DuckDuckGo, and I'm not sure of the names of the other ones. It may be that Firefox has a very high threshold for personal data too. And we're so used to using whatever we use, Safari or Chrome or whatever. But if we switch over to these very privacy-oriented websites search engines, we will cut back on the data they can find on us. They won't be tracking us across websites, across platforms.
Good points. And, actually that leads to a couple of questions that came in regarding such sites. One former computer science teacher was actually recommending using the DuckDuckGo, which you mentioned, Anita, and also Start Page, START page, as they do purportedly protect your privacy, and they stop tracking across other sites. And I don't know if you want to comment on those, or if you have
Well, it just one thing that seems interesting. I actually didn't know about the START one, so thank you so much for informing me about that. One thing that would be interesting is I have students who came working from Google in my law school classes, and they are very proud of the ability to provide relevant information and customized experiences to be, get you what you were looking for. So you might find that you don't like the results that aren't customized to you. And so one thing we were talking about beforehand about, well, is it that you want to have non-custom results in your whole life? Maybe you want it to know what kind of food you like, or, what kind of clothes you want to buy or something like that. But you could use these other search engines, particularly to seek out political information.
Wow, yes.
Right. And we were talking before about, one thing we can all do to break out of these targeted bubbles and try to address some of the democracy dilemma issues is seek out information that is uncomfortable for us to consume, that is coming from an alternate viewpoint. You might be particularly interesting to see what you'd find in one of those non-custom search tools if you're looking for news.
Yeah. Well, Rebecca, you mentioned feeling comfortable or uncomfortable, and that brings me to a question. An audience member asked if we're concerned about targeted harassment and other abuses of women and certain other groups. Do you suggest any kind of actions that we could take, or any contacts that we could make to remedying that well-known situation? I think.
Yeah, and I'm smiling, not because it's a smileable issue, it's not, but because we were talking about this exact issue before, and the concerns that we had watching the film, in noticing that it doesn't address the big problem of harassment and abuse of people on the internet, primarily women, in particular women of color, the use of the internet to distribute child sexual abuse materials. These are real problems, and they're very serious, and they tie into this questions about our democracy and about making sure that everyone is able to participate equally and isn't silenced in our public debates. And so I recommend looking at the work of this wonderful person, Danielle Citron. So that's the best that I can do, is point you to her work. Her last name is Citron, and she just won a MacArthur Genius Award for her work in identifying problems with and ways that the legal community could respond to the use of the internet to harass.
Oh, that's a wonderful resource.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Christy, go ahead.
Yeah. And Rebecca, someone asked if you could just briefly explain the fairness doctrine?
Oh gosh, well, I'll do my best. You might know more about it than I do. My understanding, please jump in, but if but my understanding, it's a bit vague, is that we used to, in our, they call it heritage media, right? Our broadcast media, have a requirement of the presentation of some counter viewpoints and certain allotments of time that would go to different, say, political candidates, political parties. And if you wanted to get a license to broadcast your media from the government, you had to get the license from the government to be on that airwave. Then you had to comply with these balanced presentation ideas. Now, since the infrastructure that the internet works on is privately owned, you don't need to get a license to send out political messages on the internet. And so that hasn't applied. This goes, and that's caused these targeted news bubbles. So that's my basic understanding of it.
Okay. And so it's just that these social media platforms are not treated in the same way. And so they aren't, the fairness doctrine doesn't apply to them.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, it strikes me that for heritage news organizations like TV or radio or newspapers, I don't know if the fairness doctrine applied in newspapers, but at any rate, they're all privately owned. And for some reason, because the internet is so new, I'm guessing, they have not gotten around to applying that to this whole new sections of new media. It's really an interesting question. So,
I agree that, from the legal perspective, and back to this analogy thing, what is this? One of the law and technology questions that comes up over and over and over again is this technology problem new, or is it more of the same?
Right.
It's very hard to answer that question. It sounds simple, but it's a challenging question. So you can argue both sides. This is brand new, or we've been here before. This is like people standing up, waving around their bill, little flyers, pamphlets. Those were targeted. This is nothing different. There are a few classic answers to why it might be new. The key one is scale. And so we can say, yes, we used to have targeted distribution of information. You used to be able to get on a stump and talk, say one thing in one town and a different thing in a different town. But the scale of platforms is what makes them really a new problem that requires new regulation. It's an answer you might agree or disagree. It was a nice point in the film, I thought, when they did have a little debate between two people. I think it was the main character of the film, the Lanier person, and then somebody else who was saying, this is just more of the same. So that's a classic debate. You can weigh in on either side.
Yeah, and looking at it as publishers or not. It's just, a platform on which publishers post. So that's
exactly. Back to the analogies. Is this FedEx or the New York Times? If it's FedEx, we aren't going to put liability on them for what they carry. If it's
I'm unfortunately, I have to jump in.
Yes, I was going to say.
And Rebecca know that our time is coming to an end. We probably have time for one or two more questions. I think we'd like to, we can go a little bit over our time slot, but why don't we go in that direction, Christy?
Yes, let's just look at one last question. Again, I want to thank our audience members for just intriguing and interesting questions, and Rebecca, and
to be here in person,
contributed to so much more information and resources for us. So
thank you.
Thanks to everyone. Somebody was asking that about the idea that most people think that the price of ads on the internet depend on how many people click on them. And they were just wondering, and I think Anita alluded to this too, that if you just deleted them or you just ignored them, do the companies get paid the same amount as they would if you click on them? But that is sort of a different question than the one you all spoke of earlier, which is just time spent online is what's valuable.
Yeah, I don't know the answer precisely to how, what the different contracts are that the social media platforms might have with their customers, the paying customers who are the people that purchase advertising space on their platform. So I imagine there could be different types of contract negotiations, and might be just as long as we served it, you get some amount of money, you click on it, you get more, you click on it and it leads to an ultimate buy, you get even more. I don't know, I could imagine lots of them. I'm not privy to those contracts, but one thing I think we could say we haven't brought up yet is you could use ad blockers if you want. And those are, those are available as well as extensions on your browsers.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you want to add something there, Anita, or no?
Well, I agree with what Rebecca said. I don't really know what kinds of contracts are out there, but at least the way it was portrayed in the film, it seemed as if each individual ad was auctioned in microseconds to each person, or each person. And so we don't know more than that. This is what the film gave us, that much information, that the ads are, using very, very sophisticated software, the ads are auctioned to the highest bidder in split seconds of seconds, or whatever the right word is,
Yeah.
to that particular user. So
Well, lastly, Rebecca, do you see any pending or possible legislative remedies just that are already out there that look like they're promising enough to be agreed upon by our very divisive legislature?
Hope that we will get a federal privacy law.
Oh, you do?
I
Okay.
I do have hope about that. I think there's a lot of forces coming together. The California Consumer Privacy Act is one, because when there are state level regulations, the companies actually want
Yeah,
to have that preempted at the federal level, so they have an easier
yes.
compliance scenario. So that's one reason why I think it has bipartisan support.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Talking about it for a number of years. So keep an eye on that, federal privacy. The Brookings Institute has done, Cam Carey wrote a great overview of recently all the bills that are pending at the federal level.
So that would be one for the audience to support if it came up.
And so it depends on the right one, but I think
Yeah.
so. I think it could be helpful.
we'll, with your permission, we'll get that information and we'll add that on too.
Great.
For our resources.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Both.
Christy, should we end our questions here?
I want to say thank you as well to the hosts to learn about the series. I'm new to Berkeley. Well, I've been here for 2 years, but I really I'm delighted to learn about this community and know that there's a rich and vibrant community watching films and talking about them. And I'm sorry I didn't get to meet you all in person, including the audience, and hope to get to meet you all another time.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so
Yes.
much. What a great evening this has been. And thank you, audience.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Don't sign off quite yet.
Okay.
I want to again thank you for joining us today, and to our audience for joining us today with your wonderful questions. We will be following up, as I said at the beginning, with both resources and a link to this recorded webinar in a few days on our website, diversityfilmseries.org. And I want to encourage you, our audience, that if you want to keep up with our films, please sign up for our email at our website. We will not sell your information. Anyway, we hope that this brief discussion has given us all a better understanding of what some of the issues are in the social dilemma. And we hope that you will be inspired to become more informed and take action. Tell your friends about this film. Again, thank you for being here with us. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you, Anita.
Good
Thank you, Christy.
Thanks.
Thank you, Maud.
Maud,
you,
Christy,
audience.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
good night.
Good night.